What's going on, and welcome back to Fireside Rangers. I'm your host, Eric Wilson, joined by my co-host, Anthony Rivardo. And today, we're going to be going through all of the top offseason moves that the Rangers made so far throughout this summer. Not the flashiest of moves out there. There were definitely some teams that went out and made huge signing contracts, but that was the whole thing last year when we got Trocheck and all that. But this year, just filling in the cracks and the holes in the roster, replacing some players who unfortunately signed with other teams. But still, each of these moves that were made should be beneficial to the Rangers one way or another. So before we get into things, Anthony, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm in my pool fit. I'm going to go to the pool today. I'm just relaxing. Kind of like how the Rangers had a pretty relaxing offseason. Nothing too flashy, as you just mentioned, Eric. They didn't go out there and sign a bunch of big names. It's not like they were making the move for Patrick Kane and Tarasenko at the trade deadline. Instead, they kind of sat back and found value where they could. And some of these players that we're going to be discussing are very great value pieces, aging veterans that can still make an impact, last leg of their career, but it's exactly what the Rangers need when they were cap strapped the way they were. I think right now they only have a few $1,000,000 in salary cap space left over, but some of these contracts that they signed, you're talking 1 year, 800,000 for one of these real top players that the Rangers signed this offseason. So it was a really impressive offseason by GM Chris Drury. And also got to keep in mind there was a huge change behind the bench. And I think we're going to go ahead and get into that in today's episode as well. But before we do, make sure to leave a like if you do enjoy this episode and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. Comment your thoughts on the topic down below in the comment section. And make sure to go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Rangers. But Eric, who is the first player or first offseason move that you want to discuss in today's episode?
I think one of the biggest ones that isn't really talked about that much is the re-signing of defenseman Keandre Miller. Now, coming off of his entry-level contract, we knew that Miller he's excelled like greatly so far in the NHL. Just last season, he had 43 points in 79 games, which for a defenseman is pretty solid, especially a guy his age. I think he's either like 22 or 23. Very young defenseman who has the potential to skyrocket into one of the best offensive defensemen in the NHL. Currently we have Adam Fox, who's out here putting up 72 points in 82 games. But Miller, he's just right behind him, got a little bit less playing minutes, playing alongside Trouba, who isn't as good of a defensive pairing as Ryan Lindgren is. But the ceiling is very high for Keandre Miller. In a perfect world, the Rangers would have been able to re-sign him long-term, lock up like a 7 or 8 year contract. But given the cap situation the Rangers are dealing with, they did have to settle with a 2-year deal worth $3.872 million average annual value. So I think overall, given the situation that the Rangers are in, given the cap, I think it was a pretty solid signing. What were your thoughts on it?
I think that it's exactly what the Rangers needed to get done for Keandre Miller, because this is a player who has he proven himself to be one of the most consistent star players on the defense? No. He does get outshined by the likes of Adam Fox, but Keandre Miller's still a really solid player for the Rangers, still young. Like you said, kind of impossible for them to lock him down into that long-term 7-year contract. But when you're looking at it, 43 points in 79 games last year, 2 years, 3.87 AAV, I think that's a really fair deal. And we've seen Chris Drury do this a few times now with these bridge deals, right? The same one that he did with Capo Caco, similar price point, 2 years, it's a bridge. How does Keandre Miller play these next 2 years? Then let's discuss that long-term contract. I think that's really the only route that the Rangers could take in this situation. I think it's the smartest route that they could have taken as well. So I think, yeah, it's a great deal. I would give it an A. I'm happy to see Keandre Miller back in the fold. I know that the Rangers weren't going to let him go anyway, but I mean, he was a restricted free agent, so there was an opportunity for him to get an offer sheet, get that match, but instead he just decided to take the 2-year bridge deal with the Rangers. I think it was smart for both parties, and I'm looking forward to him hopefully having a pretty big breakout season in 2023 to 24.
Yeah, and I fully agree. I love everything about this deal. And I agree with the rating of an A. Maybe now that I've had a little more time to think about it, maybe like an A minus, but definitely in that A range. And I would love to give it an A plus. The value there is perfect, 3.87 just for what he's contributed so far. The only two things that I'm a little disappointed in, but like the Rangers couldn't really do anything about is the length, because if we were to lock him up at that price for super long term, we wouldn't have to worry about it for a while. But now we already have a young defenseman who's beginning to succeed and break out. Give him 2 more years to prove himself. And now it's in 2 years, which is not really a long time in the NHL. he's going to be playing better. And when we get around to that long-term contract, rather than just under 4 million, we're probably going to be looking at like 6 or 7 million long-term right there. So that's a little unfortunate. And then the other thing is, Rangers are strapped for cap. We still have yet to re-sign Alexis Lafreniere. And, who knows what Lafreniere and his agent are really looking for in a contract. It's a little like up in the air right now. But with a price like that from Miller, I bet you if that price was lower, Lafreniere might have already signed. So I would like to give it an A+, but for now, we're just going to give it an A-, somewhere in that range. But moving on to the next player that we do want to talk about is Blake Wheeler. With Vladimir Tarasenko heading on over to Ottawa, Patrick Kane, who knows? No one knows what he's doing right now. Just recovering from surgery, I guess. Hasn't signed anywhere. The Rangers needed to look for some new top six replacements, and they didn't have that much money. There weren't too many big names out on the market. So the Rangers went out of their way to sign veteran Blake Wheeler. He's 36 years old currently, going to be 37 by the time the season starts, which is a little bit of a red flag right there. But this contract is pretty low risk, high reward because it's only a 1 year, $800,000 contract. So if everything goes horribly wrong, Blake Wheeler is not producing points like he should be. It's just 800,000. It's less than $1 million. Who cares? Send him off for like a second round draft pick and, start fresh. But the thing is, despite his age, Wheeler still put up 55 points in 72 games last season. Very decent stats right there. 55 points from a veteran is very hard to come by. So, when you consider the fact that he's going to be most likely playing on the second line next to Artemi Panarin and Vincent Trocheck, hopefully those stats will be inflated a little bit and he could, despite the age, at least repeat a 50-point season, if not, exceed expectations and hit 60, maybe even 70 towards the end of his career. But I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on this signing.
Yeah, so I think you kind of summed it up well there, but pointing out the fact that the Rangers had to make some sort of move after losing Kane and Tarasenko in the top six, they really didn't have many options on the open market considering how much money they had, which was not a lot, right? So they went out into this offseason. Blake Wheeler, 55 points in 72 games last year, 1 year, 800,000. You just can't beat that price point for that level of production in my eyes. I think that's the best bang for their buck that the Rangers are going to get. Now, what's the caveat to it? He's 37 years old. He could regress quite significantly this season. He could have a really down year. And honestly, if he does, that kind of blows this whole thing, right? Because we're looking for him to be a top six impact player. But at 37 years old, is it wise for the Rangers to rely on somebody who's 37 to compete in the top six? I don't think they have much choice. I really like the signing. I think it was fantastic. And I think it's perfect value considering the price point of 800,000. However, there is a lot of risk to run with this. On one hand, you're saying it's not risky because, he's a veteran, he's reliable, he's been doing this for years, he's going to keep doing it. But on the other hand, players, they run out of gas and you don't know when that's going to be. And at 37 years old, that's usually a pretty good time for the gas to start running out. So I think that this is a riskier signing than probably most fans view it, just because you don't know how good he's going to be. But if he looks like the player that he was last year, this is maybe the most underrated signing that the Rangers made all offseason. So I'm a huge fan of it. I wouldn't bring it up into the A's personally. I think I'd give it a B+. I like it a lot. I think it is a really good signing. Again, at that price point, you can't beat that. However, let's see if he can stay healthy. Let's see if he can keep the level of production and endurance that he had last year. But at 37 years old, there are some question marks. However, I do think Blake Wheeler will be a very impactful player in the top six for the Rangers.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think the biggest thing here that puts it in the A's for me is the price. A guy like Blake Wheeler, if he were to sign for any other team, he's at least making like 1.5 to 2 million per year. But, the fact that he wanted to play for the Rangers, he grew up a Rangers fan, and he wants to end his career with the Rangers. So the fact that we were able to get him at such a cheap price just kind of lowers that risk factor for me enough that I put it in the A-. It's not up there with the Keandre Miller, leaning towards an A, but I think it's still a great signing. But, there's one signing the Rangers made this offseason that I personally am a little questionable on, and that comes in the form of backup goaltender Jonathan Quick. Now, throughout last season, we had Yaroslav Halak behind Igor Shesterkin. And, he was decent. He started the season off extremely rocky. It took him like 10 starts to get his first win or something in that realm. But, towards the end of the year, he played a little bit better, became more solidified as a backup goaltender. And then after his contract expired, he decided to test the free agency market. He hasn't signed anywhere, so I guess that kind of backfired on him because I'm sure the Rangers would have loved to re-sign him. But now we have Jonathan Quick, another 37-year-old backup goaltender who's kind of at the tail end of his career. And, most likely future Hall of Famers, won 2 Stanley Cups, one against the Rangers in 2014. Never forget that one. But I don't know. It's like I'm sure he'll serve as a solid backup. Like he's not going to be bad, but he's not going to be great. I just think given the Rangers situation where throughout recent years they've relied on Igor Shesterkin to start like 70% of their games throughout the regular season, he just becomes too tired in the playoffs, and that ultimately ends up being our downfall. Having a guy like Jonathan Quick, who the Rangers might not be as comfortable starting that many times, I don't really know if this is a solution, or like an improvement from Halak rather than just like they're kind of just in the same place right here. So for me personally, I'd give this signing a B. He comes at a really cheap price, only 1 year. He'll act as a mentor to Shesterkin, but I don't really know if he needs that. He's already questionably one of the best goaltenders in the league, definitely top 3. You could make the argument for number 1, but I don't know. I think it's like, I wouldn't say it's a bad signing, but I wouldn't say it's a good signing. It's just kind of just one of those things that needed to happen. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I mean, one of those things that needed to happen for sure with Yaroslav Halak leaving in free agency. The Rangers needed to bring in some sort of backup goalie. But I think the days of, having a Georgiev in there, that's behind us, right? That was a really solid young player that the Rangers wanted to develop. They traded him away. But now they're kind of just going to have this cycle behind Igor Shesterkin of washed up old veteran goalies. And I think that's just what we're going to have to get used to. Jonathan Quick is a good player, though, but his stats are severely declining. He's old. He's 37. So really, what is he providing? A handful of games and some good mentorship to Igor Shesterkin. And that's not a bad thing. That's good, but that also doesn't blow you away. This isn't something that sets the Rangers up well for the future. This is nothing that the Rangers can maybe get trade value out of one day. This is a 1-year, 37-year-old goalie who's only going to play a handful of games, and that's really all we want to see him play. Now, is that the best strategy? I mean, considering how little money the Rangers had to spend, I mean, it's the only play they had, but ideally, I wouldn't like to see the Rangers continue to trot Igor Shesterkin out there so consistently. Like, he is the best goalie. You want to get him on the ice as soon as possible. But I think getting somebody who's a little bit more reliable behind him so he doesn't have to be out on the ice every single night, it is only going to make him better. So I think that sooner or later, whether that's next offseason or the following offseason, the Rangers do need to try to address this position with something more long-term and something more reliable than these 1 year in and out 37, 38, 45-year-old goalies that they keep bringing in every year. So I'm a little lukewarm on this one. I think I'd give it about a B minus C plus, somewhere in that range. Not the greatest signing, but also not the worst. It's really just plainly average, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think one important thing to remember is the fact that, last season was definitely Quick's weakest season throughout this little decline he's been going on at the tail end of his career. But he had dealt with a couple of injuries last season. He bounced around between like 3 different teams. So yeah, there was a stat drop, but at the same time, there were definitely like outside factors that had a very strong influence on that. Similarly to Blake Wheeler, I believe Jonathan Quick grew up a Rangers fan, took the pay cut to come finish out his career in New York. So, hopefully like a fresh system, no injuries should get him back on track. That's why, like, on paper, it's probably like a C, B minus, kind of like where you were aiming at. But I'm hopeful that he'll just have a nice bounce back season behind Igor and really just get back into form to close out the end of his career. So that's why I'm going to leave it at just a B. I'm going to be an optimist here. But I think clearly above and beyond, the best offseason move that the Rangers made this offseason comes in the form not in a player, but of a new head coach. Peter Laviolette was recently hired to be I think 37th head coach in Rangers history, somewhere in that area. After Gerard Gallant was fired after that extremely disappointing loss against the New Jersey Devils. Gallant was one of those types of coaches who was just like, Panarin, you're good. Go out there and just do your thing. and it completely backfired in his face. Laviolette's going to come in. He's a more structured head coach. Every game that he's going into, he's going to have studied the other team that they're playing against, learn their play style, and come up with some sort of counter to it. Instead of like saying, Panarin, go do your thing, he's going to give Panarin a set game plan on how to properly pass, when to shoot, not in a non-designated area. And, it's it's going to be a lot better to just have a structured plan for every player out there.
Yeah, so I really do like the Peter Laviolette hiring. I've warmed up to it a lot. Initially, I wasn't sure, like pre hiring, I wasn't sure about Laviolette, but the more that we learned about him after hiring him and really doing a lot of research on him, I think he was the perfect move for the Rangers to make, the perfect hiring. I think that Chris Drury kind of knocked this one out of the park, because when you look at what the Rangers needed, like you just said, Eric, they needed more structure. Having Gerard Gallant go out there, kind of be this tough guy and tell them, but he's like a tough guy in his demeanor, but at the same time on the ice, he just isn't tough enough. He just kind of lets the players go and play. Laviolette is kind of like a tough guy who's tough on the ice. And I think that's important. Like, he's going to tell the players, this is what you do. This is how you play, do it, and we will win games. And I think that what's really going to decide whether or not this was the correct signing, let's see what kind of start they get off to, because I think that implementing a new system like this that's way more structured and way more do as I say, the Rangers are going to have to start producing points and winning games very early on in the season for all of the players to buy in. So if they get off to a hot start, let's say they win their first 5 games, then we can feel really confident going through the year, because I think that the players will be confident. They will buy into the new Laviolette culture, the new Laviolette system, and everything should start flowing. But again, there is a little bit of risk to run with every move. If the Rangers struggle in those first 5 games, maybe they go 1-4, I think the players might question, do we really want to buy into this system? Is the system working? Is this really the culture that we need established for us? Maybe we miss Gerard Gallant, his free-form style of offense. So it is kind of one of those things where Laviolette needs to put up or shut up pretty early on in his tenure with the Rangers. He kind of just needs to set the tone immediately. And then that should hopefully carry the Rangers through the regular season, hopefully deep into the postseason. But again, it could be a little bit of a culture shock for some of these players after playing in the Gallant system. To go into this Laviolette system, he's got to produce wins often and early. And if he doesn't, I think it could get a little bit damaging. So I like the Laviolette hiring. Again, everything that we mentioned, it being more structured, him being a little bit more do as I say, I think all of that will really benefit players like Artemi Panarin, who we know is really out of structure all the time, as you mentioned, Eric, and just didn't seem to be a good fit for the Gallant system. I mean, listen, Panarin put up all those points with Gallant at the helm, but he also gave away the puck really frequently. So I think that when you're looking at Panarin, he needs that structure. And I think that a lot of the defensemen do as well, for what it's worth, because last year we would see K'Andre Miller probably go up and play too much offense, and we would see Trouba be a little bit too sporadic with the hits that he's laying. So I just think overall, having more discipline, having more of a system and structure should be really beneficial to the Rangers. So hopefully Laviolette gets this team off to a hot start and they carry that momentum throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. The hot start is extremely important. I mean, you just look back at last season, up until the very end, the Rangers were probably like 5 or 6 games behind Carolina for the division title right there. And like the first quarter of last season, the Rangers were really just not in it. It wasn't until about like 25% through the season where Jacob Trouba had that infamous helmet throw, and then all of a sudden the team just like snapped in the gear and they were just going. Makes you wonder what would have happened if they would have had a hot start and were playing consistently the entire time. So hopefully Laviolette's the man to make that happen. On paper right now, just given the potential that this hiring has, I personally give it an A+. Hopefully he'll be able to live up to these expectations that we have for him. But I guess really only time will tell how all these new signings and new hirings plan out. But, we just covered 4 offseason moves throughout this episode. There's definitely a couple more that we haven't touched upon. Nick Bonino, Tyler Pillick, Eric Gustafson. Let us know your thoughts on those signings down in the comments below, as well as your thoughts on the ones that we discussed throughout today's episode. Make sure you like, subscribe, ring that bell so you don't miss a notification, and tune in for the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Rangers.